I'm currently standing in Madeira in front of a food stack, and I've got a rather interesting lens with me at the moment, which I've been asked to take a look at and review, and it is the Laowa 10mm f2.8. And believe it or not, I'm actually holding it about 50 centimeters from my face. This thing is so flipping wide that it just takes in the entire scene. It's absolutely incredible, but it might be too wide for you. So we're going to dive into this and talk about this 10mm f2.8 Laowa and whether it's the right lens for you for its unique kind of selling traits. In a slightly different vein, I'm going to give my summary now and then go back into the details. Basically, this 10mm C-Dreamer lens from Laowa is an exceptionally sharp, ultra-wide rectilinear lens. By that it means that there is almost no distortion in the edges of the frame, so that when you shoot architectural or natural subjects, your straight lines remain straight so long as your lens is pointing directly at the subject as opposed to pointing up or down. The lens is amazingly sharp from center to edge of the frame and shows extremely low chromatic aberration, both axial and lateral variants of that. The lens isn't completely enshrouded in metal, so it is incredibly tough and durable, and despite that comes in at a very svelte 470 grams of weight, so it's a lightweight wide-angle lens. Then to top it all off, to make this a particularly attractive option to anybody wanting to do landscape photography, it only has a 77mm filter thread, which means that you can actually add filters. In fact, you can add up to 2 stacked filters if you're using the Nisi JetMag system, so that you can actually use filters with such an extraordinarily wide lens. That is unheard of. That's just amazing. If there is a downside, it is the rather strong vignetting, and of course there is, for those astrophotographers out there, a small downside in the fact that there is exhibitant coma in the corners of the frame when you are shooting speculative light sources like stars. The lens itself is ideally suited for architectural photography, people who are wanting to get in really close to subjects but show a huge range of area for it. So it is a specialist lens. If you are looking for such a wide-angle lens, this is absolutely the lens to go for, particularly as it is pretty well priced. There are 2 variants available. There's the manual focus variant that I have over here and an autofocus variant. The manual focus variant has 14 blades in the aperture, while the autofocus one only has 5. The autofocus is incredibly snappy in terms of its focus, whereas the manual focus takes a while to get used to focusing because you have to be so precise. And that, in a nutshell, is what this lens is. This is a speciality lens. It's an ultra-wide lens with surprising sharpness, extremely low aberrations. It's not perfect, but it's uniquely capable. I don't know any other lens like this that can give you such a wide-angle view without introducing really quite bad optical aberration. This is a very clean lens. It delivers clean, straight lines, surprising sharpness, and creative flexibility that you just don't find in other lenses. With that, let's get into the details. In the video, I'm going to discuss the build, the quality, the price, and what you expect to get out of this 0D 10mm. But I'm also going to look at how you could potentially use the lens, because of course, this is so wide that it is quite a unique specialist lens, and it's not likely that most people are going to want to use such a wide-angle lens. Again, as I mentioned right at the beginning though, if this massively wide angle is something that you're looking for, then this is probably the go-to lens to get to it. The Laowa 10mm is constructed like a brick. It's got nice metal finish all the way around, to the extent that I don't think this thing is going to break even if I throw it at the floor, let alone drop it. It is tough. The sample that I was sent by Laowa South Africa has a nice aperture ring at the back that goes from f2.8 to f22 in clicked stops, so they're not declicked. And the focus ring itself, which also has a nice textured metal feel to it, runs from infinity to 12 centimeters minimum focusing distance, and it does that with about a 90-degree turn. That 90-degree turn means that precision can be difficult, and I certainly found that focusing through the viewfinder, you do need to be careful that you don't accidentally misfocus. I would highly recommend using the LCD screen at the back to be able to nail the focus, because if this gets it off, it's kind of obvious. So you want to make sure that you do nail the focus with your photography. The autofocus version, on the other hand, doesn't seem to have that problem, and everybody who has used that lens has said that it has blisteringly fast autofocus that is very, very accurate. The manual focus is different. You've got to take your time and you've got to be slower with it. The full metal build extends to the bayonet mount at the back, but unfortunately what it is missing is electronic contacts. So with the manual focus version, you don't see what lens is on your camera when you're looking at the metadata. The autofocus version, on the other hand, does have those electronic contacts, so you maintain that kind of communicability between the lens and the body of the camera itself. The lens comes in the major mount systems available at the moment, meaning Nikon, Sony, Canon, and the new Sigma L Alliance. So it is available to a full range of cameras out there at the moment. The manual focus lens that I have over here is also different to the autofocus version in the sense that it has a focus scale on it showing the marks from infinity, in fact just past infinity, through to the 12mm. The autofocus lens doesn't have those marks, so you do kind of rely on the autofocus with that particular lens. But then again, that's why you buy an autofocus lens. What makes this lens particularly unique, though, is the fact that not only is it so wide, but it has a 77mm screw thread at the front, which means you can use filters. And in fact, I used a full jet mag system as well as the 100mm square jet mag filter adapter so that I could put graduated filters on this lens. For a lens this wide, that's unheard of. That's absolutely phenomenal that you can actually use filters when you are shooting with this. Then there is the creative aspect of this lens itself. 10mm is seriously wide. While shooting in Madeira, I was able to get the full sweep of the São Lourenço Peninsula in a single shot. With 10mm, I still had space on the sides to spare. So this is extraordinarily wide. So wide that I would caution people about using it, because wide-angle photography requires a really good foreground. For instance, in this image that I shot at the Ilhas de Ribeira de Janela, I was able to include the foreground rocks, the water flowing into from the ocean, as well as the sea stacks in the background, and then still have massive space around that as well. Now, you're not always going to have wide-angle scenes like that, and for a lot of photographers, 10mm is just plain too wide. However, if you are the kind of photographer who does need a wide-angle lens for certain types of interiors, or when you're trying to squeeze as much information into your frame as possible, you can't go wrong with this lens. This is about as wide as you can go before it just gets ridiculous and you're starting to look at a fisheye lens. That width, in fact, is 130.4 degrees wide. This means, of course, that, if you point this down at your feet, you've got these stubby little feet in the distance and these long legs that you're going to be seeing in your shot. So don't go photographing your feet, for instance. It does give you a kind of unique view when you are pointing it at yourself. Needless to say, I am hand-holding this lens at the moment. It's about 40 centimeters in front of me. So if you're doing the vlogging style of photography, it is actually possible to get a huge range of information behind you with your head in the photograph talking. But it is one of those use cases that you can have the lens for. Optically, the lens is extraordinarily sharp for the kind of lens that it is. If you stop down to around f5.6 and f8, there is incredible sharpness all the way from the center through to the corners of the frame itself. So it is a very effective sharp lens, particularly if you're going to be shooting interior architecture, outside architecture where you're needing the details in brickwork, for instance, and of course details in the landscapes that you're photographing. And of course it is weather sealed. This is something new for the Laowa lenses, and as you can see, I am actually filming in the rain as we speak. And I'm not that particularly worried about the lens getting some moisture on it because it is sealed and it has rings at the front and on the focusing ring as well. It can handle pretty severe weather if you're going to be shooting outdoors in inclement conditions. This is different to the earlier 12mm lens that Laowa used to sell, which didn't have those gaskets on them, so it wasn't weather sealed. One of the things that I found particularly surprising about the optical performance of the lens is the fact that it has so little chromatic aberration in the corners of the frame. Now, by chromatic aberration, you're looking for those little flare marks that you see on the side of dark subjects, particularly when they are backlit. The kind of stuff that you're going to see when you're photographing in a forest and there's a scene and there's a sky behind it, or when you're photographing at dawn and you've got a dark foreground with the sun coming up in the distance. There is virtually no longitudinal chromatic aberration. That's when the different wavelengths of light, or the colors, don't focus in exactly the same spot on the focal plane itself, leaving a sort of yellow or red kind of ghosting effect on the edge of very dark subjects. You just don't get that on this particular lens, even when you are all the way at the edge of the lens itself. And at the very extremes, if you can see anything, as soon as you stop down to f5.6, it disappears. And it's the same with lateral chromatic aberration. So it is a very well-behaved lens when it comes down to the sharpness and the color rendition of the lens itself. On top of that, there's no color cast that I could see in the actual glass itself. So it's a very, very clean lens. Well suited to doing architectural work if you're wanting such a wide angle lens for that. Sharpness as well is very, very good across the frame. There's some slight stretching of detail which you can only see beyond 100% pixels, where the edges seem to be stretched to be able to maintain the rectilinear perspective of the lens itself. The manual focus version of the lens that I've got doesn't give the same kind of starburst that the 5-bladed autofocus version does give. Examples shot by photographers using the autofocus lens show a very defined 10-pointed star when you're shooting interspecular highlights like the sun or stars and streetlights. The 10mm manual focus version has a much more controlled starburst effect. So if you're doing night photography where you don't necessarily want those starbursts, this is the lens to go for. If you're looking for that defined starburst, then you need to think about the autofocus version. But this manual focus version has a much more softer kind of starburst to it. You still get it, as you can see in this photograph at dawn, but it isn't as defined. That's a personal choice with which one you prefer. If you want that defined starburst, or if you would prefer something that looks perhaps a little bit more natural, you'd go for the manual focus lens in that case. Shooting directly into the light, you can see a much reduced sun star and then some faint but very well controlled flaring, as well as a kind of ghosting ring effect on the edge. But again, for such a wide lens, this is surprisingly well controlled. Of course, what a lot of photographers want to hear about when I'm talking about such a wide angle, fast aperture lens is its astro performance. And there's good and bad news over here. The good news is, of course, that the lens is very, very sharp and you are going to get pretty decent photographs of stars in the center of the frame. The downside is that at wide open apertures, you're going to see something that looks akin to batwing coma in the very edge stars. Now this is where you can actually see a kind of flare coming out from the star itself. So it's not a perfectly pinpoint star in the sky, it's a star with a kind of comet-like tail. This isn't true coma though, it might be more of a kind of astigmatism. In some of the stars you actually see sort of 3 points coming out from it, or potentially a flare going both positive and negative in the photograph itself. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend this lens for astrophotography. It doesn't give you the cleanest stars. That said, I don't know any other 10mm lens that would be able to do that. So if you are looking for that extreme width, like in this photograph that I shot in the Finale Forest in Madeira, then the 10mm is going to get you there, and it is very good to use. Just be aware that some of your stars are going to have batwing coma in the corners. This is an issue that is fairly uniform across the range of these ultra wide angle lenses though. So it isn't something that I think is unique or a particular downside to the Laowa lens itself. It's just something that you need to be aware of. Price wise, the lens sells for just under 19,000 Rand in South Africa, which for its width again is a decent price. Laowa have been known to be producing the oddball lenses, those wide angle lenses, the probes, the macro lenses that go into like 4 or 5 times life size. This 10mm joins that field of lenses. It is a speciality lens. It's not something that everybody should buy for their camera bags. That said, if you are looking for something of this width, this is pretty much one of the best lenses out there that you could possibly get your hands on. Not only is it small, lightweight, and incredibly rugged, it is amazingly sharp, has incredibly few optical aberrations for a lens of this design, and is just plain unique in the kind of field of view that you're going to be getting. The extreme width of the lens can be seen in this image comparison between this stairwell photographed with a 16mm lens and the same stairwell again shot with a 10mm lens. You can also see the difference between the Laowa 12mm here in this forest scene and the new 10mm D-Dreamer f2.8. So I can see particular uses there where you would find this lens useful. Like in a stadium, for instance, if you're trying to capture the entire surrounds of the stadium as well as what's happening up close. Or if you're a sports photographer and you're trying to get into the huddle, this is going to get everybody in the huddle in the shot. It's like using one of those ultra wide GoPro lenses, except having far, far better image quality for that final photograph. I can also see it being used on stage and in theatre for that unique worm eye view that you can get from having such a wide angle lens. In nature photography, you can get it in so close to flowers that you can create this contextual world where you've got the object right up in front with this massive world around it. So it is a phenomenal lens for creating a new kind of view of the scene around you. And now it is pouring with rain, so I'm going to actually have to quit the rest of this video and say cheers. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please do remember to click the like and subscribe buttons in the various corners around the YouTube block. I hope to bring you more reviews like this, and in fact I have another Laowa lens coming to me shortly which I'll be able to play with and talk about. Until then though, thanks again for watching, and I hope to catch you on the next one. Cheers. And now I've got to get out of the rain.